Welcome into Sportsmemo's betting podcast for July 8th. It's college football preview podcast with at Mid-Major Matt. Mid-Major, welcome into the podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. We're talking, I think, arguably my favorite college football conference, Conference USA. We're talking the East Division here, and we're going in order of Charlotte, FAU, FIU, Marshall, Middle Tennessee, Old Dominion, and then Western Kentucky. So you ready to get after it, Mid-Major?
Oh, yeah. Plenty of information to dispense.
Let's get after it then. We're talking the Charlotte 49ers up first, 5-7 last year in conference, 4-4. ATS, they did win a little money, 7-5 and 6-6. Even number here, over and under. They did fire their coach over the off season here. They're bringing in Will Healy here, and we're talking off recording here before the podcast. And you like the hire, Mid-Major, huh?
Yeah, Will Healy's done a lot. Now, you look at his record, he was 13-21 in 3 years at Austin Peay, but before he got there, it was one of the worst programs in FCS football. And then as he worked, his first year was bad, and as he worked and brought in more players, he started making them, not necessarily a power, but he started making them better. This is a team that it was 5-7 last year. When you look at the Conference USA, it's all about the non-conference games, and it's also all about kind of spot plays. You talked about why you like this conference, and there's going to be games where a lesser Conference USA team gets the right spot. Charlotte is playing Gardner-Webb at Appalachian State, UMass, and at Clemson out of conference. They've got a decent offense. Chris Reynolds back at quarterback, Benny LeMay at running back, Victor Tucker at wide receiver. Their defense last year was 9th against the run nationally. That's right, 9th against the run nationally, and they bring back 8 starters. They are switching to a 4-2-5 scheme, which is going to maybe produce some early struggles, but Charlotte's a team that you may ask why they fired their coach. I like the hire of Will Healy, and it may be a struggle this year, but once he's able to bring more of his personnel in, I think the 49ers will be back in better graces.
Yeah, and you bring up the Conference USA, spot plays, because it is kind of a wide-ranging conference. Not all the colleges near each other, so you can go from El Paso to Boca Raton up to near you up in Virginia. So it's kind of a lot of travel for I guess smaller market teams. It makes it tougher. So do you find yourself looking to bet home teams more in Conference USA?
Yeah, and plus this conference, especially because if you look at the top of each division is really tight. The best thing is, or the thing that's going to help decide is, how many of the easy teams do you have at home? We'll get to it. The UTEPs, the UTSAs, the Rices, the teams that are going to be towards the bottom of this conference. Heck, you even go down to ODU as well. How many of those teams do you get at home? How many of those teams are, any good when the time you get them? That's going to decide some of these races. Charlotte could be one of those teams that, maybe towards the end of the year, you look, they host Marshall November 23rd. That could be a tougher game if the 49ers start figuring things out. But, they could push up against a little bit of bowl eligibility.
Good stuff, Mid-Major Matt. And follow him on Twitter at Mid-Major Matt. And Matt, for the listeners out there that maybe haven't heard you too much, you've been with Sportsmemo about a year now. Been doing very good in baseball so far. Ended into the All-Star break on a huge run here, so check him out for baseball. Also, we just discounted the rest of the MLB season for just $2.99, guys. So if you're a baseball bettor, check it out at sportsmemo.com. Should last for another 48 hours or so, the discount on the MLB service. But Mid-Major, tell the listeners a little bit about you. You're hosting a radio show. You're covering the ACC Media Days here next week, right?
Yeah, I work out of Richmond, Virginia. I host my own radio show. We do a lot of gambling talk, and my premise is at least that, there's a lot of great handicappers on this website who do the big games, and I'll occasionally dip my toe into the Big 12 or things like that, but I kind of try and go underneath the radar, look at Conference USA, Sun Belt, AAC, the conferences that may not necessarily be on your radar, and certainly that's, my angle when it comes to college football is I'll spend more time on some of the smaller games than probably some of the other people do.
Yeah, and if you're in the Richmond area, listen to him on ESPN Richmond. He's got a show from 3 to 4 every day there. But next up, talking about a team that actually does get some main headlines here. The FAU Owls, talking about Lane Kiffin's team. And Mid-Major Matt, he's entering his 3rd season here. A lot of people thought, Lane wouldn't make it 3 full years in Boca Raton, be picked off by another big university. But, he's living in South Florida, making $1 million a year. That sounds sounds kind of right up his alley, running his own show. 5-7 last year, though. Down year for FAU after winning the conference the year before, being one of the more impressive teams in all of the country, especially making money ATS-wise the year before last year. They really killed it. This past year, just 3-5 in Conference USA play, 4-8 against the spread. So they gave a lot of the profits from 2017 back last year. Just 4-8, lost money burner for FAU, and 6-6 over under again here, pretty much even over and under. They start off with Ohio State and then UCF before getting to Ball State. So a tough opening here. The first two games for FAU, likely looking at an 0-2 start. But overall, what are you thinking for the Owls this year?
Yeah, FanDuel Sportsbook has the over-under win total. They're one of the only people that has every team so far at 8 wins for the Owls. I'm much like you. I'm surprised to see Lane Kiffin still there for a third year, but as you said, he's getting paid. He's in Florida, and he's not in any risk of losing his job. Last year was a disappointment. The first place I'll look here is at quarterback. Chris Robeson was recently reinstated after being suspended for the spring. That means Indiana transfer Nick Tronti got some more reps, and maybe he'll overtake Robeson, despite the fact that last year, Robeson would put up 15 touchdowns, had 12 interceptions. He was a running threat besides a passing threat. Harrison Bryant at tight end and Willie Wright at wide receiver are pretty good. The defense is where the interest is because they have their third defensive coordinator in 3 years. They've got a pretty strong secondary, but once again, up front, the front seven has some work to do. Losing Jovan Durante and Kareth White, which were a bit of a surprise this offseason, you're right. They're going to start out kind of slow with Ohio State and UCF. Their big games in conference, home against Marshall, home against FIU, who are two people who we'll talk about. They'll both be rivals here. I think the Owls may struggle to get up to that 8 number, but I don't love it. I think they could be looking at a 6 or 7 win season.
Yeah, 6 or 7 wins. Going down their schedule here, I do think it sets up well in conference. You brought up a couple of them, MTSU and Marshall back-to-back, the Marshall game on a Friday night there in Boca Raton. They do have to go at Old Dominion, at Western Kentucky, and at UTSA towards the end of the season. So FAU is kind of an interesting case study here. Would you look to bet them under their season win totals this year, mid-major?
At 8, I would consider it. Right now, or last I looked on FanDuel, the under was at -120, which I don't, it's not terrible, but I wouldn't pay that price. I don't love it. I think that they could be a 6 to 8 win team. So there's going to be cases when we go down the line that there's going to be teams that I like a lot more than their win totals, but I wouldn't push it with regards to Florida Atlantic.
Okay, and their opponent in the Shula Bowl, just about 100 miles apart from each other, probably less actually, Boca Raton to Miami here. FIU, the Panthers here. Butch Davis is also in his third year, and I'll tell you, mid-major Matt, he is recruiting the heck out of Broward, Palm Beach, and Dade County. I believe he has something like 40-plus 3-star and above recruits in his 3 years here. That's pretty impressive for a CUSA team. That is the most in the conference. Last year they finished 9-4 last year. 10-3 ATS, one of the best teams against the spread in all of college football, and 8-5 towards the over. So Butch Davis in his third year, as we know, third year is a pivotal point in coaches' careers. It's either when your seat starts to get hot, or the team really kind of goes to that next level in a lot of cases. So FIU starting at Tulane, I think that's a tough matchup. But when you're playing a kind of triple option-ish, an option-style offense, you do want to play them in the first game of the season because you get so much preparation time for that option-style offense. But I think Tulane's a tough start here. What are you thinking overall for FIU and Week 1 against Tulane?
So FIU has one of those stretches that you usually see an SEC team have. After that road game at Tulane, they play 5 of their next 6 at home. Western Kentucky, New Hampshire, at Louisiana Tech, Massachusetts, Charlotte, UTEP. We've talked about the scheduling. I mean, you can't get much better than having Massachusetts, Charlotte, and UTEP right back-to-back. The Western Kentucky and New Hampshire game as part of that start, I mean, those are going to be pretty easy as well. You don't have to worry about offense here. James Morgan, 26 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year. Maurice Alexander was a guy that they kind of used as a Swiss Army knife. Austin Maloney is a very solid slot-type guy. They have a decent stable of running backs. I actually watched a lot of FIU games last year because they were an intriguing team. The defense was the issue last year. They were 12th in Conference USA against the rush, allowing nearly 200 yards per game there. They're going to have to tighten that up. Obviously, with the road game against Tulane to open things up, they're going to have to tighten up the rush defense. By the way, also, they have an extra week to prepare for Miami, who will be in FIU on November 23rd. I'm pretty sure they'll be pretty jacked for that game.
Absolutely. That's going to be a big one. I mean, it's pretty much all the guys that didn't get a scholarship offer from Miami going to FIU. But that should be a big one. And that's after the Shula Bowl. So they're at FAU, and then a bye week, and then Miami, and then at Marshall. Talk about 3 big games to end the season there. FAU, Miami, at Marshall. What do you think? They go 2-1, 1-2? What would you have to say for those 3 games, Mid-Major Matt?
I mean, I would say 1-2. I don't know who that one will be. I mean, you would think maybe they could beat Marshall or Florida Atlantic on the road. So if you're betting this win total and you're hoping to get, because it's 7.5 on FanDuel, you're hoping that they go and they knock it out of the park early on that home stretch because, as you said, at Florida Atlantic, Miami, at Marshall, they could close 0-3, and you may fall half a win short if you take the win total.
This is an interesting one. I mean, 7.5. What would you bet FIU right now?
Well, so if you do the quick math, I think they lose at Tulane. I think they win those 2 home games against Western Kentucky and New Hampshire. I think the road trip to Ruston to take on Louisiana Tech is always a tough one. You've got a Bulldogs team that we'll get to when we do the West.
Yeah.
That's not bad. But then you got Massachusetts, Charlotte, and UTEP are wins. So there's 5 most likely. At Middle Tennessee, finally losing Brett Stockstill, so maybe that's a winnable game. ODU at home, that's 6. So we still need 2 wins from at Tulane, at Louisiana Tech, at Middle Tennessee, at Florida Atlantic, at Marshall, and Miami at home. It's kind of dicey to find 2 wins out of that group, so it's probably a win total I would stay away from.
Yeah, you're right, man. I had FIU kind of circled here to bet over, but at that 7.5 number, I feel like the odds makers are on to kind of what I was seeing. That at Tulane, that's tough to chalk off as a win. Same with that at Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech's defensive line really gets after it. So with those 2 likely or possible being losses, and then down the stretch like we talked about, that does put them at 6 or 7 wins, which falls under. So might pump the brakes on FIU betting them over the total. But next team up, we got the Marshall Thundering Herd, 9-4 last year, 6-2 in conference. Really good season for Marshall. 5-8 ATS and 9-4. Big trenders towards the over. Talking about in-game totals, 9 overs, only 4 unders here. Mid-Major Matt, what are you thinking for Marshall this upcoming year?
Well, Marshall, Doc Holliday's a very good coach. He's 70-46 in 9 years at the school. Isaiah Green, last year was a mixed bag. 15 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He does lose Brady, his number 1 wide receiver, but maybe Obi Obialo will take over there. The defense has a ton of experience, 6 starters back. They also have, we talk about Charlotte. Former Charlotte head coach Brad Lambert comes over to coordinate the defense. The secondary could be really good. The non-conference games, VMI at Boise State, Ohio, and Cincinnati, so 3 of their first 4 at home. Those aren't bad. By the way, I would say, depending upon what the number is, and you don't get FBS, FCS numbers very often, but I would look to bet Marshall in that first game against VMI. The Keydets have traditionally been a punching bag when it comes to FBS, FCS games, if you look at their history. The over-under win total, 6.5 now. FanDuel has it heavily shaded to the over at -176. I'm not going to ever pay that. So maybe if you like this team, maybe you wait a little bit, wait for it to get to 7, and maybe you get a better price, because I don't think that half a win makes a difference. Western Kentucky at home. They play at Florida Atlantic, at Middle Tennessee. They don't have a ton of tough road trips in conference, and close out with Louisiana Tech, at Charlotte, and FIU. So Marshall might be the team I think that's going to win this Conference USA East.
In Mid-Major Matt, we're talking Conference USA East Division here with Mid-Major Matt at Mid-Major Matt on Twitter. And before we started this podcast, I was asking about your weekend and stuff, and you said, pretty boring outside of preparing for college football. I love hearing that. Would you mind telling the listeners exactly how you start preparing for the college football season?
So what I like to do, and it's a process that I've been using for several years now, is I like to go through and do the win totals for everybody. And I'll do every single team, and I'll go through. I have my trusty Athlon magazine sitting next to me, and I'll go through everybody. And then I'll take like a week and a half break. And then my Phil Steele arrives, and I do them all over again with some of the numbers that are out there in the market. And sometimes, I know it's going to sound weird, but you look at a different magazine, you see a schedule differently. So then I kind of see where the differences are. And the only real win totals that I recommend are the ones where I'm like a win or two or a loss or two different. I mean, if it's right on the line, I don't really say that, and I don't, I'm looking for plus prices. If you're going to tie up your money for 3-4 months, you want it to be worth it. So pretty much a lot of the recommendations I have with regards to win totals are either plus prices or ones that I feel like are sure bets, like they're 2 win or 2 loss differences, and I'm willing to pay the price because I'm that sure that they're right.
Okay, so going through both of those magazines, do you get any other kind of publications or any websites that you like people's opinions from?
Well, I mean, I also get Street and Smith, which used to be Sporting News, so I pretty much have those 3 magazines, and they all provide different perspectives. And of course, since some of them come out earlier, they don't have all the information. But I mean, look, I just like to read. On a week-to-week basis. I know there's a lot of guys who like to do trends, and that's great. I'm not a trends guy. I like to read articles. I go through coaches' sound bites and listen to press conferences and kind of get an idea. Plus, we've talked about in past podcasts about spot plays and stuff like that. There are times where you may get a lesser team but a beautiful spot, so you just take your chance and bet on them and hope that your handicapping came through. That's kind of the thing when it comes to these smaller schools. The Vegas has a ton of information, but I feel like they don't spend as much time because they know the SEC games, the Big 12 games, the Big 10 games are going to get a whole lot more attention and a whole lot more money.
Absolutely. Mid-major, Matt. And guys, you can use the podcast coupon code CFBPOD. That's CFBPOD at checkout for Mid-Major Matt or myself, Drew Martin's full season NFL and college football for $300 off. So for less than a dime, you can get the full season package, no extra charges later, using the coupon code CFBPOD at checkout. No spaces, anything like that. It's pretty easy on the Sportsmemo logout page, the checkout page. There's a coupon code verification that comes up, and if you type in CFB Pod at checkout, it will take $300 off. So continuing down the line here, we got MTSU, Middle Tennessee, 8-6 last year, 7-2 in conference, 8-6 against the spread as well, and 7-7 over under. They lose Stockstill as the quarterback. Can't believe he actually graduated. One of the better, in my opinion, one of the better college quarterback careers there is. So even though it is small conference, that guy, he had great accuracy, understood the offense, coach's son. He could really run that offense. So how is MTSU, in your opinion, Matt, going to rebound off of this loss at quarterback?
Well, yeah, I guess that's the best thing you could ever say about somebody is that they finally graduate. It means they make such an impact. MTSU didn't do themselves any favors early at Michigan. They also play at Iowa in their first 4 games. They do have home games against Tennessee State and Duke non-conference, so that won't be as terrible. The big question here is who's their quarterback? Is it going to be Randall Johnson, who's a JUCO quarterback, or is it going to be Asher O'Hara, who had 20 pass attempts last year, but he didn't exactly get a ton of time with Stockstill being there. Whoever is going to be under center, Ty Lee is a place that they're going to want to go. Last year, 883 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. CJ Wyndham is another solid wide receiver. The offensive line, though, only has 2 returning starters, so whoever it is could be on the run quite a bit. Defensively, former Syracuse coach Scott Schaefer, still their defensive coordinator. This was an aggressive bunch. They love to blitz. They love to take chances. Now, sometimes it hurt them. If you look at some of these scores, there were some times where they got blitzed in terms of offense. Gave up 45 points to App State, 32 on the road at UTEP. That's not exactly great. 37 at Tennessee Martin. Now, granted, it's an FCS game. The win total here is 5.5. A lot of times I came up with 5 or 6 wins. They get FIU at home. They get Marshall at home. But they also travel to Florida Atlantic and North Texas back-to-back, close out the year at Western Kentucky. They do get Rice and ODU at home. Not a win total that I love, but I'll be watching, especially since I don't know who their quarterback's going to be this year.
Yeah, and whenever you find change in college football, really in any sport, that is usually a great time to try to beat the odds makers because they don't have a lot to go off of either. So if you can read the team, get a kind of hone in on one team with a new quarterback, read them out here, keep in mind the odds makers got to concentrate on all 130 teams. So if you can find change and jump on it, which might happen here at the beginning of the season with MTSU, you could make some money for yourself. But moving down the line, we got ODU up next, Matt. 4-8 last year, down season for the Monarchs. 2-6 in conference. Looks like 5-7 ATS and 9-3. Big trenders towards the over. What are you thinking here for Old Dominion?
All right, so the Monarchs here, last year they had a really tough year, 4-8. One of the big wins, of course, was the Virginia Tech win, 49-35. A lot of the players who started in that game are gone. Steven Williams is probably going to be the starting quarterback. Fascinating case. 2 years ago, he played and was the youngest player in Division I football. He struggled. Last year he played a little bit, only had 81 pass attempts. Keyshawn Strong, solid running back, but not great. 499 yards rushing and 9 touchdowns as part of a group. They do have a couple Tech transfers, Eric Kuma and Chris Cunningham, but this offense could really struggle. Defensively, they were all happy because they hired David Blackwell from East Carolina. Well, East Carolina was one of the worst defenses in the country year after year. Lawrence Garner had 100 tackles last year. It's weird. FanDuel has 4.5 wins for this team, and I really don't know where I could find 4.5 wins. Now, the juice is ridiculous. It's at minus 195, so maybe you wait and see if it falls a little bit, see if the wins go down to 4, and maybe get a better price. It could be a really long year for the Monarchs, who have a very tough schedule.
And you bring up the quarterback, Williams, I believe is his name, and he was the youngest quarterback. He's a lefty, right, Matt?
Yeah, he's a lefty, and last year he didn't play as much because Blake LaRussa came in. Blake LaRussa is not playing his final year with the team. He has decided to find other pursuits, so he doesn't have the security blanket. It looks like Messiah DeWeaver and some other guys could be behind Steven Williams, but I really feel like this team wants Williams to be the starter, so I don't know what will happen if he struggles because there's not exactly a lot behind him either.
And we got Bobby Wilder here as the head coach. And one thing I've noticed with Old Dominion is their home field advantage, man. They pack that out. As far as the Conference USA kind of home field advantage, would you put this at number one?
It's probably up there. They are renovating the place. It's going to be a whole lot nicer and a whole lot bigger, at least somewhat bigger. So I think that home field advantage is nice and all, but like if you're not winning towards the end of the year, and plus – this is the problem with Conference USA. How do you build rivalries? October 26th, Florida Atlantic comes to Norfolk. Like, okay, that's really cool, Lane Kiffin, all that good stuff. But, like, why should ODU fans come out when their team's potentially terrible? They don't have a rival with FAU. They don't have a rivalry with UTSA, who's their home game November 9th. They're trying potentially to have a rivalry with Charlotte. That's the final game of the regular season. But, like, I don't know. It's the tough thing about Conference USA. If you're not grouped with somebody else, how do you build rivalries and how do you generate interest?
Right. So you say that there's, it's tough to find wins here. I mean, what about ECU, WKU? You're right. UTSA maybe, at Middle Tennessee, Charlotte as well. I mean, aren't those coin flip games or no? You think they're really up against it?
Well, if we were to do definite wins, I say Norfolk State's definitely a win. UTSA could be a win. East Carolina could be a win, but we talked about East Carolina in previous podcasts. I like East Carolina this year. I like the hire of Mike Houston. I think he'll do good things with the Pirates. It's no guarantee. A Charlotte at home, Charlotte could be playing for a bowl game. ODU could be playing for nothing. So, look, if you find 5 wins, then the over is worth a look because the over is around plus 165. I can't find 5 guaranteed wins, so therefore I don't feel like putting my money and tying it up on a thing that by the end of the year you're going to be kicking yourself saying, yeah, I probably should have taken the under or I should have just sat this one out.
Right, Mid-Major Matt. And guys, if you're around Virginia, make sure to check out Mid-Major Matt's show on ESPN Richmond. You're on from 3 to 4 Eastern time?
3 to 4 Eastern Time, 99.5, 102.7 ESPN on the FM dial and ESPNRichmond.com.
And next week you're going to the ACC Media Day, right?
Next week I'll be at ACC Media Day talking to players, coaches, personalities, people who cover this sport, and I don't know how many other handicappers get that kind of access. Now, I'm not going to make any betting references to any of these people, but that's access that a lot of people don't necessarily get.
Absolutely, man. That's good stuff. See what's going on behind the scenes. And guys, we got one team left here, Conference USA East Division. We'll have Mid-Major Matt on breaking down some more college football before, but remember the coupon code CFBPOD. That's CFBPOD at checkout for $300 off Mid-Major Matt's full season NFL and college football at sportsmemo.com. It will also work for my full season, Drew Martin, NFL college football full season at sportsmemo.com. We got the 3-9 Western Kentucky Hilltoppers up next, just 2-6 in conference, 6-6 ATS, and 5-7 trending towards the under here were the Hilltoppers last year. Mid-Major Matt, what are you thinking for WKU this upcoming year?
So the Hilltoppers have Central Arkansas in week 1, then they play a conference game, then they get Louisville in Nashville, and then they play another couple conference games, host Army on October 12th, and play at Arkansas in November. So interesting scheduling quirk with Western Kentucky in that they have one out-of-conference game in each of the first 4 months. This offense could be really fun to watch. The question will be who's going to be the starting quarterback. Stephen Duncan last year, 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, but they brought over Arkansas transfer Ty Story to challenge him. Lucky Jackson, Quinn Jernigan are the wide receivers out wide. Joshua Samuel, a very solid running back in the backfield. As I said, 9 starters, pretty much, yes, their whole offensive line is back from last year. So the offense should see an uptick from the 21 points they averaged last year. On defense, they are another team that runs the 4-2-5. D'Angelo Malone and Juwan Jones are pretty solid up front when it comes to rushing the passer. The big question is, how will Tyson Helton handle being the head coach his first year? There will be some potential expectations. Western Kentucky used to be a really good football team, and then they kind of fell off a little bit, with the 3-9 record last year, including a loss to FCS Maine in week 2. The Hilltoppers total is 5. It's minus 114 to the over, minus 102 to the under. Ironically, 5 wins is about what I came up with if they take care of business at home. But this is a team that if they figure things out and get the right quarterback under center, they could be really interesting come October and November.
Mid-Major Matt, I'm looking here with Western Kentucky. They bring in Tyson Helton, his first year as the head coach, and I believe he's Clay Helton's brother. I could be wrong about that, but he was the offensive coordinator for Tennessee. He was also the quarterback coach for Sam Darnold at USC under Clay Helton, his brother. So, do you see any big changes here in the coaching administration? Things that maybe bettors can use towards their advantage?
I mean, he's swearing that the offense is going to be a lot better, and you listed his offensive qualifications. I think we'll see – they only averaged 21 points last year, so I think that they're going to improve upon that. If their defense stays as poor as it was last year, we could see a lot of overs. But then again, as you know, this conference is pretty much – you're going to see 60s, 70s win totals for a lot of these games because – a lot of teams have offense, and very few of them have actually any good defense. So the consistent thing in Conference USA is high totals, and potentially even with those high numbers, still going over those totals.
Yeah, good stuff overall for Conference USA East Division here, Matt. And guys, remember the coupon code CFBPOD at checkout, $300 off full NFL and college football season package. But Matt, anything else you want to throw out to the listeners?
I think Marshall's going to win. I think Florida International, Florida Atlantic, and potentially Middle Tennessee, if they figure out their quarterback situations, will be the biggest challenger. But I think Marshall is the representative from Conference USA East into that Conference USA championship game.
Interesting. Okay, who would you go with number 2 if you had to pick?
I would say it's Florida International, and then I would say probably Florida Atlantic, and then maybe Western Kentucky, then Middle Tennessee, and Charlotte and ODU fight for the scraps on the bottom.
And any big upsets this year that you could kind of circle, similar to the ODU over Virginia Tech game last year?
In this conference, I'm not really sure necessarily. You've got some potentials. I mean, Louisiana Tech week 1 plays at Texas. We know how good the Longhorns are. There are some potential upsets, but the conference as a whole is not as good. I don't see Florida Atlantic being Ohio State. I don't think that they're going to beat UCF in week 2. Florida International is not going to be huge underdogs against most of their non-conference opponents. Maybe Marshall can go and scare Boise State on the road, but as far as this part of the conference, I don't really see it right now.
Okay, and so you would say the West Division is the stronger division, at least more top heavy?
I think the West is probably more top heavy. I mean, North Texas is really good. Southern Miss is really good, and then you've got UAB and Louisiana Tech, who are kind of the middle of the road, and then UTSA, UTEP, and Rice. I mean, when we get to those previews, there's going to be not a lot of wins for any of those teams towards the end.
Right. I'm with you, man. Well, guys, check them out on Twitter at MidMajorMatt. Remember the coupon code CFBPod at checkout, $300 off. Thanks for tuning in, and we will be talking tomorrow CFL, Every Game on the Board podcast. Best of luck with your bets, guys.